The room was quiet, but not silent. The kind of quiet that hums with the weight of things left unsaid. Sundar Pichai sat at the edge of the polished table, staring at the faint reflection of his face in the glass. The boardroom lights above cast thin, sterile halos on the surface, and in those circles of light he saw his own shadow stretching toward him. His hands were still, too still. It was only minutes since the decision, but he already knew something irreversible had been set in motion. The air seemed heavier, as though the oxygen itself was demanding payment for what he had chosen. Decisions like these do not fade. They root themselves in the skin, in the marrow, in the dark corners of a man's mind, waiting to return in the quietest hours of night. The room emptied long ago, yet the echoes of voices lingered. Applause, approval, relief, but none of it belonged to him. None of it mattered, because he knew the truth. A single decision can elevate a man above the heavens or bury him beneath the earth. And he had chosen. Earlier years, before this suffocating silence, he was a boy in Chennai, India. A boy who shared a cramped 2-room apartment with his family, where each space had to be transformed into something else. A bedroom, a dining room, a study. His father, an electrical engineer, carried in blueprints that smelled of ink and sweat, while his mother stretched every coin to hold the family together. Sundar learned early that comfort was borrowed, not owned. That survival depended on precision, patience, and the ability to see further than the wall in front of him. Yet even then, there was something in his eyes, something unshaken. He had the strange, almost cruel gift of memory. He could remember every phone number he dialed once, every sequence, every detail. Numbers obeyed him, and so did silence. While others in his neighborhood filled the air with chatter and laughter, Sundar spent nights alone, building, calculating, imagining worlds inside the thin wires of his mind. But gifts come with curses. In silence, ambition grows teeth. It whispers that you are meant for more, that the world outside these walls belongs to you if only you are bold enough to take it. And when opportunity arrives, ambition sharpens into hunger. Years passed. The boy became a man. And that man walked into a storm named Google. In its corridors of light and glass, Sundar carried with him the invisible weight of his upbringing, the hunger not to return to obscurity. Every hallway echoed with opportunity. Every office door was a gate to power. But at Google, power was not given freely. It was tested, broken, rebuilt, and given only to those who understood the brutal truth of the valley. Mercy is weakness, and hesitation is death. He learned this fast. He learned it in the quiet glances of those who doubted him, in the smirk of an engineer who thought his accent too heavy, his presence too quiet, too soft. He learned it in the way others fought, tooth and nail, to push their ideas forward, drowning the room with volume while he remained silent, watching, calculating. For years, he was underestimated, dismissed, overlooked. A man of numbers, of discipline, but not of spectacle. And yet, in the shadows of louder men, he waited. The decision, the one that would alter everything, came disguised as an opportunity. It was 2008. The company was restless. The world of technology was changing faster than anyone could control. Apple had unleashed the iPhone, and the air itself seemed electrified with the promise of a new era. Mobile was no longer a feature. It was the future. And at Google, fear brewed beneath the arrogance. If they misstepped, they would be buried by Apple's vision. If they chose wrongly, years of empire could crumble. And in that storm, a voice turned toward Sundar Pichai. He was tasked with deciding whether Google would continue licensing a proprietary search bar for mobile phones or take the unthinkable risk to build an entire browser of their own for nothing against giants like Microsoft and Apple. It was a gamble so large, so reckless, it could stain his name forever if it failed. On one side, safety, stability, continue licensing, make profit, avoid risk. No one would remember him, but no one would blame him either. He could fade into the background, another executive who chose the cautious road. On the other side, war. Creating Chrome would mean challenging not only Apple and Microsoft, but the very foundation of the Internet. If it worked, Google would dominate not just search, but the portal to all human knowledge. If it failed, the collapse would be tied to his name. He stood at his own crossroad, and the silence around him was deafening. Memories surfaced, the smell of ink on his father's blueprints, the cramped rooms of his childhood, the voices that once dismissed him as too quiet, too forgettable. He knew the truth then. Safety was the slowest form of suicide. The only way to rise was to burn every bridge behind him. And so he chose. He chose Chrome. It was not a decision made in triumph, but in dread. Because every man who makes a decision of that magnitude knows it does not matter how right you feel in the moment. What matters is whether history will forgive you. The months that followed were a blur of obsession. His team worked like men possessed, driven by his quiet but relentless will. Every line of code, every design choice, was sharpened by the knowledge that failure meant ruin. He barely slept. He ate in silence, staring into screens that glowed like cold suns. His children grew while he was away. His wife sat at dinners where his body was present, but his soul was elsewhere. And Sundar began to feel it, the creeping corrosion that ambition leaves on the heart. When Chrome launched, the world laughed. Critics called it unnecessary. Microsoft scoffed. Apple ignored it. Even inside Google, whispers spread that Sundar had wasted resources on a vanity project. The humiliation was quiet but sharp, the silence in meetings louder than insults. For weeks, Chrome was mocked as nothing more than a curiosity. But then it grew. Slowly at first, then like a tide swallowing the shore. Users discovered its speed, its simplicity, its unyielding focus. And one by one, they abandoned the old titans. Chrome became not just a browser, but the doorway to the Internet itself. The gamble had worked. Sundar had carved his name into the bones of Silicon Valley. Yet with victory came something darker. Because triumph has a taste, and once a man tastes it, he cannot return to the blandness of caution. Ambition becomes addiction. Success becomes hunger. And the same decision that lifted him up began to demand payment. As Chrome conquered the world, Sundar rose within Google's labyrinth. Promotions came, praise followed, and eventually, the unthinkable happened. He was named CEO, a boy from Chennai, now at the throne of one of the most powerful empires on earth. To the world, it was a fairy tale. To Sundar, it was a prison of glass and steel. Because in the shadows of every boardroom, he still heard the echo of that first choice. The knowledge that his entire ascent had been purchased by a single moment of reckless courage. And that meant every decision after was measured against it. Every move, every hesitation, every breath was judged by the ghost of Chrome. Late at night, alone in his office, he would stare at the city lights beyond the window and ask himself, was it worth it? He had power, yes. He had wealth beyond imagination. But his children had grown without him. His wife learned to live with absence. His friends remembered him only through headlines. The silence of that boardroom, the silence of his first irreversible choice, never left him. It only grew louder. And now, back in this moment, in this quiet after another monumental decision, he understood what so few ever do. Success is never free. Every ascent leaves a trail of bones, some belonging to others, most belonging to the man himself. The room remained still, but inside, the storm raged on. He had chosen once before and reshaped the digital world. Now he had chosen again. But whether this would be remembered as his greatest triumph or his most fatal mistake only staying, and silence would tell. The city outside his window pulsed with artificial light, each tower a monument to decisions made by men like him, men who gambled their sanity on visions too large for a single lifetime. Sundar pressed his palm against the glass, feeling the faint vibration of traffic, of movement, of progress. The city was alive, but he often felt hollow, like an echo bouncing endlessly in chambers no one else could enter. The decision he had made that day, like the one years before, was not just about business. It was about the shape of the world itself. And with that realization came the crushing truth. His choices were no longer his alone. They belonged to billions. A single adjustment of direction could shift economies, destabilize nations, change the way humanity communicated, worked, dreamed. There is no air light enough to breathe under that kind of weight. He thought back to Chrome. How naive he had been. He had believed then that courage was enough, that vision could absolve the loneliness. But now he knew, courage is only the entry fee. The real cost is living with the consequences. For every triumph he carried, there were scars hidden beneath. He remembered the night an engineer stormed out of a meeting, furious that his team had sacrificed innovation for control. "You killed it," the man spat. "All for dominance." Sundar had stayed silent, his expression calm, but inside something cracked. Because he knew it was true decisions are not about building dreams. They are about eliminating threats. And Chrome was never just a browser. It was a weapon, a fortress, a gate through which Google could keep the world tethered. And yet, when the headlines praised him, when shareholders applauded, no one spoke of the human cost. No one asked about the marriages strained, the children unseen, the nights when even his own reflection felt like a stranger. Success does not ask permission. It takes and takes until nothing remains untouched. Still, Sundar continued forward because he had no other choice. Once you rise to a certain height, retreat is impossible. The same silence that nurtured him as a child now mocked him. It whispered, "If you stop, you will vanish. If you hesitate, someone else will replace you. You are only as real as your last decision." This new decision, today's decision, had been no different. Artificial intelligence. A frontier as vast as it was dangerous. Some in the company wanted restraint, guardrails, caution. Sundar, quiet as always, listened. He listened to their warnings, their fears, their predictions of catastrophe. And then he remembered, safety is suicide. Just as Chrome had been a leap into the storm, AI demanded the same. The risk was astronomical. The possibility of error, of misuse, of backlash colossal. But the alternative was worse. To fall behind, to watch others claim the future. Sundar knew what hesitation looked like. He had seen it in the eyes of men who once ruled, only to vanish into irrelevance. He would not be one of them. And so, once again, he signed his name to a gamble that would reshape the digital age. When the room cleared, when the applause settled, he remained. Because applause never fills the silence. It only deepens it. He thought of the billions of people who would one day depend on what he had unleashed, and the billions more who might suffer because of it. That is the paradox of power. The same hand that builds is the hand that destroys. The night deepened. The office lights dimmed. Sundar leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, and the past returned to him like a ghost. He was a boy again, watching his father bring home the family's first telephone. The weight of it, the solidity of the receiver, the magic of hearing another voice through wires, it had stunned him. He had memorized every number dialed, as though the machine had imprinted itself into his brain. That phone was not just an object. It was possibility itself. It was proof that voices could leap across distance, that the world could shrink in your hands. That memory was what drove him all these years. That was the moment that planted the seed of his ambition. And yet, standing now at the pinnacle, he could not help but ask, had he betrayed the purity of that moment? The boy who saw wonder had become the man who saw leverage. He thought of his children, their faces illuminated by the glow of devices he had helped shape. Did they see wonder, as he once did? Or had he already robbed them of it, replacing magic with machinery, connection with control? The thought gnawed at him. Because if even his own children could not escape the shadow of his decisions, what of the world? Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Screens flickered in every home. Voices spilled through invisible networks. Algorithms decided what people saw, heard, believed. And somewhere in that sprawling digital chaos, a man named Sundar Pichai sat in silence, haunted by the knowledge that he had helped design the cage. He did not regret Chrome. He did not regret AI. Regret, after all, is a luxury. But he understood the cost. He understood that the higher he climbed, the lonelier the air became. The men who cheered him would one day condemn him. The public who trusted him would one day accuse him. And when that day arrived, the applause would vanish, but the silence would remain. In the darkness of that office, he whispered words no one else would hear. Every decision is a scar. He looked at his hands, steady, aged by labor, not of the body, but of the mind. Each wrinkle, each line, a story of risk and consequence. He wondered how many more decisions his hands would be asked to deliver. How many more scars could he carry before the weight crushed him entirely? And then came the cruelest realization of all. It was not the decision itself that haunted him. It was the pattern, the inevitability. He would always choose the storm over safety, because deep within, beneath the polished exterior, beneath the calm voice and quiet demeanor, there was still that boy in Chennai, pressed against the wall of a 2-room apartment, dreaming of escape. A boy who learned that survival meant pushing forward, no matter the cost. That boy had never left him. That boy was still pulling the strings. So perhaps this was the final truth. He was not a visionary, not a savior, not even a leader. He was a prisoner of ambition, chained to the decisions that had lifted him up, doomed to repeat them until the end. The lights flickered once. The city below breathed. Sundar stood, adjusting his jacket, his reflection staring back at him from the black glass. There was no triumph in that reflection. No joy. Only the quiet understanding that destiny is not a gift. It is a debt. And every decision made is another payment, another pound of flesh torn from the soul. He turned away from the window, leaving the office in silence. Behind him, the city glowed, oblivious to the man who had just wagered their future once more. And in that silence, in that lingering weight that wrapped itself around him like chains, Sundar Pichai carried on knowing that history remembers victories, but men remember scars.